which grandfather organized you to get on the?
Which grandfather?
Yeah.
Jacobi.
And was your grandmother alive too?
Yes, sure.
Right. So they arranged for you to get on the transport.
Apparently, I have no idea who arranged it, but it was him because he had a relative in Woburn House, which is the London office for refugees.
Right.
And so he got in touch with him, and he's the one who sent the paperwork for me to come to the Kindertransport. Right. It's through the British Woburn House I got there.
Okay. And so then your mom and Anne took you to the train station in Berlin?
In Berlin, yes.
Now, were there other children getting on at the same time?
Yes, sure. Yes.
50, 20, 100?
I don't know. There were quite a few.
Right. And you didn't know anybody?
Of course not.
No other of your friends were on the transport?
There was nobody from that school or anybody on that train, no.
And you had one suitcase, right?
One little handbag, yes.
And what was in it?
A pair of pants, a pair of shoes, toothbrush, some underwear.
Any money?
Money? No, money. Yeah, $10.
Right.
10 shillings or $10. Yeah.
Right.
That's all. Yeah.
And then you took the train to Hamburg.
To Hamburg, and then we went on to
a boat.
The boat, and I'm almost certain it's called the SS Washington. I'm going to Google it and find it, but we went to Southampton, and from Southampton I took a train.
And were there like adults with you and big groups of kids who went on this?
No, I was all alone with a nun. I traveled. She picked me up.
And then you went to London?
Yeah.
And then you took another train?
From London, I was put on a train to Westgate.
Right.
And that's where the family Himes met me.
Right.
And the reason that they sent a nun, my guardian, I was very fortunate, were two guardians. One was a giant industrialist of cleaning company. I forgot his name.
An English person?
Yeah, an English person. And the other one was Colonel Layton, who was the commander of the Isle of Man. And I was he was my guardian. Mm-hmm. So they paid my expenses, and they made sure that I was put into Westgate. Okay. And later on, I needed his help to get out of there. But
so then you went took the train to Westgate, and there was a family you stayed with.
They met me,
yeah.
And
they had a house or an apartment?
They had a house. No, they had a house by the sea.
And how many
there
kids
were five other kids. They had two sons.
They had two sons.
And then there was four other kids.
Right. From the Kindertransport, other kids?
I can't remember that. There must have been. They must have been.
They
were all German.
Right.
Yeah.
Did you share rooms? Did you have two rooms? You had your own room?
I had a room in the attic. A luxurious room, yeah. Okay.
And then you didn't speak any German. I mean, any English, right?
Not at all. That's a famous story I told you a number of times, where I left my suitcase standing, because the father introduced his sons, my boys, and my boys, if you read Western stories, the boy is a carrier of food. Mm-hmm. So he said, my boys, and I left my suitcase standing. I figured these are his
the help will help you to your room. The boys would take the bag up for you?
Yeah, they did, I guess. So I stayed with that family and went to school.
Now, how did you get to, so every day you walked to school? Was it a school bus?
I walked to school.
And so you started, was it an English school or a special school?
No, it didn't exist in those days. It was a regular public school. It was a very nice school. And I went to school.
But you didn't speak a word of English?
No, but the guy I lived with, he gave me this under the table lessons of English, so-called. But by listening to people all day speaking English, that's the same. But Ruth learned it the same way. She spoke no English either.
Right. And so, did you have dinner with the family every night, or did you come home and was there a family dinner that?
Yeah, there was family dinner every night. A lot of rabbit, which I hated.
Rabbit?
Oh, God, yes.
And so then you went to school every day, and you took more than English, right? Every class was in English, right?
Yes, I managed to follow after about a couple of months. I was able to follow the class, but I had some very good, nice teachers who spent time with me after school to teach me English. So that was it's really.
And what do you know? What grade you were in, or how? What do you remember any of that?
I was 15. I don't know what grade.
So after, and did you get letters from your mom, or ever hear from your mom for the first 6 months or 8 months, or?
Yeah, I got postcards from. In the beginning, I got postcards from her, but.
But she was still in Berlin.
In Frankfurt.
In Frankfurt.
Yeah. But then we lost touch completely because there was no mail or something. But she got over from France more or less 2 days after the war started, into England.
With your grandmother and grandfather?
No, he died. By that time he was dead already.
Right.
So when I was still living in Frankfurt, he died. So that's she died in Auschwitz.
Yeah.
That we found when we went to where did we go? Which concentration camp? Theresienstadt, Rosenheim. And I found her name, and I got papers on that she died in Auschwitz.
Your grandmother.
Yeah.
So you were in Westgate for 6 months, a year?
No, when Dunkirk happened, you can go by those dates. We had to leave.
Because Westgate was on the coast,
Right on the coast,
on the channel.
So we saw Dunkirk, the evacuation of Dunkirk.
Talk about that a little bit. What do you remember?
Loads of thousands of boats going across the channel.
Yeah.
Did
everyone go down to the docks to help, or people stayed away?
We stood at the railroad station and gave out sandwiches. I think I did that too, where the trains were loaded with surviving soldiers. It was a human disaster how they got back. That was thousands got killed. From the Americans. A small army came back, and that was the beginning.
From the English, right? Yeah.
They took a terrible beating. That they survived that is a miracle altogether. But Dunkirk was right across from Westgate, from Dover, and Dover and Westgate were within an hour's drive. Yeah. So that's.
So after that, you left Westgate.
We had to leave because it was invasion fear. So they put troops there to fend off any invasions. So we went to a farm in Tiverton, and
with that same family.
They went with me. They took me along. Yeah, I still was the tenant. They still got paid for me. Yeah.
And so, how far away was that? That was like 2 hours?
In the Midlands.
Yeah.
That's about 2 hours.
Another house? So you moved into another house with your...
Into a farmhouse. And I didn't go to school anymore. I became a waiter.
Really?
In a restaurant.
In there. So how old were you then? 16 or...
6 months. I had to move because they considered me an enemy alien. They caught me riding a horse. You can't have transportation when you're an enemy alien. The British arrested me. And they were going to send me to the Isle of Man.
And this was in that other town?
This was in Taunton. And I had worked on the farm a little bit, and I worked as a waiter.
What do you mean riding? I didn't know you could ride a horse. I didn't know you could ride a horse.
Yeah, that I could, without a saddle.
Did you learn that in Germany?
No, I learned it on the farm.
Okay. And what did you do on the farm? You worked on the farm?
I worked on the farm. I cleaned out the stables and
5 days a week, 7 days a week, every day?
Yeah, more or less. But then I was arrested more or less, and I went in front of a tribunal to decide whether I could stay in Taunton or whether I go to the Isle of Man. And that's when I told them that I was a guardian of Colonel Layton. And they said in typical English, "Don't be cheeky, young man." In other words, they didn't believe that. But they did call his office in London, and they were told that not to do anything. And he sent a car for me down to Taunton to bring me back to London. And I was not interned. That was off. And I went back to London.
And where'd you stay in London?
In a boarding house. in a boarding
So
house.
you left that family then after that?
That I left the family. So I think I was with that family a year and a half at the most, maybe a little more. It's sort of a blank in my memory. That's a complete blank. How long I was there, no idea. It must have been with the Dunkirk and with the farm and being a waiter and all of that.
So where were you a waiter? In a restaurant or in a coffee shop?
In a restaurant, like a busboy, never mind a waiter. Yeah, you know the story. And that's.
And so then you went to London. You were in a boarding house, and what'd you do for money?
Then I was sent back to school in Leeds, to Ord.
So then you left London and went to Leeds?
After a couple of days. I was in a boarding, in a rooming house, I think. And I went to Ord in Leeds.
And that was a school you lived at?
That was an engineering school.
And you lived there?
Yes. And then I stayed in that school for, I think, 6 months to learn to be a mechanic.
So what type of things did you learn?
How to run a lathe, how to
What is that? What is a lathe?
Mechanic school.
Okay.
The lathe is where you turn out, where you make items, a grinding machine and a welding machine. And we had all German teachers, so I learned everything in German. But I did go to school for 6 months learning how to smooth a piece of metal, you know, the real German way of, you had to be a real apprentice. So when after 6 months I was finished with that course, and then my mother turned up, and then I went back to London.
And she had an apartment then, or
she had an apartment. She had a room,
right?
And I had a room in the same building.
Now, were you in touch with your mom when you were at Ord?
Yeah, I went to see her. She lived in Kidlington, outside Oxford, and so I went to see her. And then I...
Was Susan with her? Was Susan with her then?
No, Susan was working in a household as a maid somewhere in London. We didn't see each other very often. That's it. And that's when I went to Ord, and that's when I got my first job.
After Ord?
After Ord, I got my first job.
What was the first job?
The Singer sewing machine.
So remind me of that story.
That's an old story.
Yeah.
I worked for Singer as a mechanic.
And where was Singer? In London? Or?
In London. And was very proud of my first job.
How did you get the job? Did the Ord help you find the job, or you looked in a newspaper?
No, I went to an employment office and lined up for jobs. And they sent me out on a repair job. And this guy was supposed to make uniforms, but he made fake fur coats, white fur coats.
What's a fake fur coat? You're taking fake fur.
Rabbit coat. And his machines were all lined up. Instead of making uniforms, he was blacklisted already. But I went there to repair one of the machines. And I got the cover off, and I got the belt going again. I told him to switch on the machines, you know. And by mistake, I didn't put the covers on, and it got a hold of some white coats, the belt, and threw the feathers all over the place. So I knew I had no job anymore. So,
so you didn't...
Then I went to an aircraft factory, because I learned to be a proper mechanic, and outside London in Richmond. And there I got a job in a welding machine as a welder. And then I went to...
What type of aircraft?
No, first I made bookshelves.
Oh.
I welded all day long these bookshelves.
With a mask on and a burner?
Yeah. And then I was volunteered for the army, and that didn't work out.
What do you mean?
Because I was deferred for some reason. And then I worked for the Lancaster Bombers. I got a job I was cleared finally. It took a long time to get clearance as a German. And I worked in the Lancaster factory.
Where was that?
Lancaster Bombers.
Where was the factory?
We're in Richmond, outside London.
And did you live in Richmond then?
I don't know. I lived in London, and I took the train every day.
With a tube or a train?
No, train.
Back and forth? And how many hours a day? Let's start at 7 in the morning and
It's a long day, yeah. And
then you had.
and I bought a motorcycle, and that didn't work.
What do you mean you bought a motorcycle?
To go to work, yeah. But you couldn't get gasoline, so it made no sense. After a while, I had a motorcycle without gasoline. The gasoline was so short that you could only get a few gallons. So, and Richmond was a long way out of London, a good hour by train. So I took the train, but I had to walk to the train station up in London. Quite a walk.
Which train station?
And Hampstead.
And your mom had a room and you were staying with her, or you had your own room?
Yeah, we had an apartment, so-called apartment, yeah. And Susan and I and Eva Bollock stayed there because she was blown up by a landmine where she lived.
Yeah, tell me about that.
Yeah. She had a room about a block away from us. And
Eva,
and the building got hit
by a flying
with a
bomb.
flying bomb, yeah. And so she moved into our house.